Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We are here again. This is our virtual learning series. It's our special guest edition, and we have our special guest, Sandra Chow, joining us from Beijing. We had the pleasure of talking with Sandra this morning for us, last night for her, and she really has just some great advice for us. Before we get to meet Sandra, I do want to talk about our virtual learning series. So we have been able to offer virtual professional development to educators all across Canada. In about a week and a half, we've worked with over 1,000 educators, just helping them navigate this world that we now are in as educators. A lot of that work has been thanks to Google for Education for funding those for us. But we're excited to announce that we're going to have some Microsoft supports coming up soon as well. Sandra, can you just go to the next slide for me?
Sure.
Thank you. So EdTech team, we are a professional development organization. We have been offering professional development across Canada since 2013. That has been face-to-face interactive professional development, and we are still able to do that. We are still face-to-face for most of our workshops, but we just happen to be in different living rooms and offices. But we're thrilled to be able to offer our virtual learning series. And Sandra, next slide for me.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned, we are working with Microsoft Canada, and we are thrilled to hopefully be launching very, very soon a virtual learning series for those of you working in a Microsoft and O365 environment. So this session this evening, Sandra's going to give us just amazing advice, but she's also going to give us tips for how we can leverage this Microsoft and O365 environment to teach virtually. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the amazing Miss Sandra Chow.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Here I am in Beijing, China, and my name is Sandra Chow. And today I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. But before I do that, I know many of you have already started to write where you're from in the chat, but I'd love to know a little bit more about you and where you are feeling in this journey. So as we know, the language of our youth nowadays is emoji. So if you can just put in the chat how you're feeling about this whole online e-learning business, so we have an idea of just what emotions are going through everyone right now. And feel free to use all the emojis at your disposal. It could be the dancing emoji, it could be the brain blowing emoji, but just put that in the chat so we have an idea of some of the emotions that everyone's going through. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to share a little bit about who I am. So my name is Sandra Chow. I'm currently in Beijing as the Director of Innovation and Digital Learning, but I am a Canadian. I taught in Toronto District School Board for 17, 18 years. And in between that, I also went to Taiwan, where it was right also during the H1N1 outbreak. And it's been kind of interesting to see how some of that experience from the outbreak has also been transferred over to this experience that we have now. And I'm really thankful for just how during that time we had put ourselves in a pandemic training mode, and some of those ideas and thoughts are still with me today. I've also been with TVO as an instructional liaison, and so maybe I might have connected with some of you while I was there. And that was a really fun time. And I know that in Ontario, a lot of the resources are being referred to from TVO, which I still heart. And currently I'm at Keystone Academy, which is a private bilingual school in Beijing. And I've been here this is my second year, so 2 years in, and very exciting indeed. And I'm also a parent, like many of you who are listening, and I have 3 kids who are currently still sleeping because we're on our online learning break. for a week, and they've been building forts, and we've been baking together during this break, which was much needed. And so I like to start off with just an introduction of our journey, and I see some of the emojis out there, lots of interesting thoughts, and I think that's exactly where some of my thoughts were as well. A lot of thinking, a lot of, wow, this is exciting, or a lot of, now what? And praying for sure. Um, but if you can see the calendar, I put our calendar on purpose because it gives you a timeline of what was going on. So school went on as normal. We had our Christmas break. And then shortly after, we had our Chinese New Year break, which changes from year to year because Chinese New Year is a lunar calendar. And it happened to be just 9 days after our Christmas holiday this year. And my family and I had gone to Singapore and then went to Philippines, and we were on the beach when things started to get really bad in Wuhan, China. And all of my colleagues and I were scattered all over the world. Some of us were in Asia Pacific on beaches. Some of us were in North America, in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. We were all over the world. And you can see my arrow right here. About the 29th and 30th, one of my friends from a neighboring school in Beijing ended up texting me on WeChat and said, "Hey, Sandra, things are getting pretty bad. Do you guys have an online learning plan?" And I was thinking to myself, no. And I wrote back, no, but what a great idea. I better get on that. And so sure enough, while my kids were still playing in the pool, I sat in a conference room and started tapping out an online learning plan. And shortly after that, was on Teams with my leadership colleagues. And we were on late at night, similar to what I am right now, just having meetings about our online learning plan. I showed them a draft and we collaborated together. We even created a new Microsoft Teams where we would put all of our documents on. We at that time called it January 2020, thinking that it would only last a short period of time. So for us, similar to all of you, information was just coming through daily from the government officials, from our school head of school. We didn't know what was going to happen. We seriously thought it might be anything from a few days to just a few weeks. And if you look at the calendar, here we are on April the 3rd. I'm in April 3rd, you guys are April 2nd. And we're still online learning. And we would never have guessed that, having been where we were. And for us, online learning started on February 5th. We had planned to start school on February 3rd, but because everything was happening so fast and we thought our teachers needed time to adjust, we started on February 5th fully. In the meantime, we also held some Teams live meetings, which are very similar to YouTube live meetings, where the parents would only be able to watch and observe as participants and post on questions, and we were able to moderate those questions, which I love because anything they posted, which at that time could have been anything because they were in panic mode, was filtered by us, and we would be able to post up anything publicly to teachers or other parents as we needed. So we held Teams live meetings for our staff, for our parents, just to make sure that they were calm and knew what was happening. So that's a little bit of our journey. And I'm going to move into this infographic that has helped us a lot as we have been moving forward in online learning. This infographic is from Jennifer Wathel, who is in Hong Kong, and it came in about 2 weeks into our online learning period, and she had posted this up on Twitter. And my colleagues and I were looking at this and thinking, this is exactly how I feel. This is perfect. And it put into um, words or graphic just the different stages that we were going through. So I think for many of you right now, you are probably in this survive mode, and makes perfect sense. Some of you might be a little bit further along already. But when we first joined, we were trying to figure out what digital tools we would be using, what was our learning management system. And for us, we decided separately for our primary and secondary. Our primary, we kept using Seesaw, which was a platform that our school was already very familiar with. But with our secondary, we stuck with Teams, which was what we were using all along. We also have ManageBack, which is our IB program. So we use a combination of the two, and it was very helpful that we stuck with what we knew and use that as our platform. And so in that survive mode, you're just trying to figure out what you're using, how to communicate with each other. Another very important question in that firefighting stage or survival mode is, are we going to go asynchronous or synchronous? And from the very beginning, we thought we would start with asynchronous and slowly move into synchronous, because the asynchronous, which means you're not going on at the same time, we're not live in the same video conferencing screen. You can post things up onto a Teams or a Seesaw and just post assignments up without having to worry about it being live. And that was great because it gave teachers who were in different time zones, who were just trying to figure things out, time to prepare for the evening, post it up the next morning, and make sure that they could just breathe and do things as they were going. But shortly after, with lots of parent input and lots of student input, we started to move into instructional videos, because parents are saying, well, where are the teachers? We want to see their face. We don't just want to see lessons posted. And so we started making sure teachers were posting up videos that would show their home and what life was like, and just connect a little bit more with their students. We started to have to talk about what online meetings were. And thankfully, we had been doing training for our teachers daily through Microsoft Teams. And we had set up a recurring meeting through Outlook, and the teachers just joined on every day afterwards. And it was really helpful. I'm just going to show you really quickly on my chat, where you can see, there's Michelle's lovely face, but you can see here that we had a daily recurring meeting, and it just kept going. And every morning the teachers would hop in at 10 a.m. and we would be able to just connect again. And so after a while, it just became habit. The teachers joined in maybe 9:50, started saying good morning to each other, and then we would have a training. And it was really handy that this was all set up from the beginning. So that's kind of the strive stage. And then slowly you start moving to the thrive stage, where you're venturing into synchronous meetings. And we had Teams meetings with our students. And it was nice because the teachers already had a familiarity with what Teams meetings looked like as a participant. So now they were doing it with their students. And it became really, really exciting to see the things that the teachers were doing with their students. First off, in secondary, our secondary felt a little bit more comfortable because they were already one-to-one, and their students were already very familiar with the Teams environment. But slowly now, our primary has been moving into synchronous, and we're 8 weeks in, and now we already have a schedule for our primary synchronous meetings. And hopefully, as you move on, you'll get into the thrive stage and then the arrive stage. So as you're going through, you'll notice that you're going to be going into these different stages. It feels like culture shock, the W curve of culture shock for me, because it's a very similar feeling where your body's going through culture shock. What? I'm not teaching in the classroom anymore. I have to teach live. I have to teach online. I've never done this before. And I feel like this graphic is very similar to that culture shock feeling. So I'm going to move out of this for a second and have you join into a pulse check for us. And I think it's really important that during this time, we get to know where we are in this stage. And I'd love for all of you to share that as well, because it's also nice to know that we're not alone in all of this. And so I'm going to have you join in something called a Mentee Meter. Some of you might have used this before, but this is a really fantastic tool that I like to embed in with the lessons that we have. I use it with my parents as well when we do parent meetings, because it is so easy to use. You can use your phone, join in using www.mentee.com. You can open a new tab and type that in as well. And then I'll ask for a code. So you just enter 6211 and then 6. And I have it over here as the presenter side. So you can see that there is the present mode. So I'm going to present that. And you can just post in what you feel. And so as you start entering into this Mentee Meter, it will post for me how many participants are here on the side. But here's the image again. Just share with me which of these stages do you feel that you're in currently. And I'll hide this image. And as you start posting, it will, for me, start to populate with little dots where you are at as well. So my guess is many of you will be in that survive mode, and perhaps a few in this drive. Wow, there's somebody in the arrive. Hooray. That's awesome. And this is a really great tool, because you can also do multiple choice meetings in these, where you can have bar graphs. I use it also in, there's a word cloud. So you can also do an example where you ask your students or your parents, use one word to explain how you feel right now, and it will actually start to populate with different words popping up, and it's a great tool. Now, Mentee Meter is free, and you have unlimited presentations, and you can also post up using slides. And so you'll have 2 slides that are free, and then you have unlimited presentations in the free version. So we have a bit all over the place, people in different places. I'm going to then move into the next slide, as I'd love to know a little bit more about how you're feeling. But this is allows you to post up a little bit more words. So the question I have for you is, as you're going into this e-learning journey, what are some challenges you are anticipating that you'll encounter? And you should be able to post up as many options as you want. So you can post up more than once. But I know during this time, while we were going into this e-learning journey, some of the challenges I was anticipating was, well, what equipment will our students have? Do they all have access to technology? What will their internet look like? Oh, they might not be able to access all of the tools available that we normally have available at our school. They might not have the iPad. They might not have all of the tools that we have in our school to do coding. How will we do science experiments and all of those things? Yeah, exactly. How do we ensure that our staff are properly trained to do all that they need to do? We had a wide variety of staff skill sets in terms of technology, and some of them were super comfortable using Teams already, but I know that some of our teachers were just barely getting started, and we had to upskill that. And then engagement was definitely one. And for us, added on to that engagement was attendance. How do we make sure that students will actually join in on our lessons? And our teachers were all over the place, and I definitely was worried about how much motivation and engagement our teachers were going to have. And thankfully, our teachers were rock stars and continue to be rock stars. They have never worked so hard in their lives. I had a conversation with and chat with one of my colleagues last night as I tried to pull her into doing something else, which was a little bit more fun. We were trying to do a flip grid, sing a song for our staff, and she was like, "Sure, I'll do it." And she's just been so great, and so many other teachers have been as well. Um, yes, definitely the technology gap in terms of how are we going to make sure that some everybody's doing the same thing and it's equitable for our students. That was definitely something that we were thinking about. Funny enough, assessment was something that was in our mind in the beginning, but even more so now as we move closer to the end of the year. We had report cards that we were doing for our first semester, and we actually continue to send them out. But our third quarter report cards were something that we just started to post. I started to think about, and we decided to scale back on what our third quarter report card would look like, much more like a progress report. And we're one school, but for some of you, you might be working in a district and you might not have control over what a report card looks like, and that's going to be really challenging. So a lot of things to think about, and how are you going to, as a whole district or as a whole school, think about supporting teachers and students through that process. Yeah, how are you going to get materials out, books out to students? Thankfully, there's so many resources out there, things like Epic, which are free books, Storybook Online. There's so many resources out there. So I'm going to let this scroll, and these are some of the thoughts that I'm going to pass on to Michelle and her team, because as they continue on with their virtual learning and training for all of you, these are some of the things that they might be able to help you address as well moving forward. But moving on, I'm going to just share with you some of the lessons that we've learned in this process. And like Floreline Maria said, let's start at the very beginning. I want to start off with just some of the foundations that I think are going to be really important to you as you move forward. And I recently have posted on ISTE, which is the International Standards of Technology Educators. They have a lot of resources out as well. And I posted a blog post that shares just some of the thoughts that we have learned in our journey, and I think distilled down to the most important. And funnily enough, it's not the technology that's the most important. For me, it was these three things, these three principles. And the first one being be purpose-driven. I think as we move into crisis mode, it's very easy for us to lose sight of our learning objectives, our mission as a school or as a district, because we are just firefighting and we are in fight or flight mode. A lot of those principles we lose sight of. But if we just take some time and breathe and realize that nothing is in emergency mode right away, I think a lot of the pressure that we put on ourselves is pressure that we put on ourselves. We think that it has to go out today or yesterday, but it can actually go out 2 days later, and it probably won't make a huge difference to our students or our parents. So if you just take some time to think about our decisions, it actually helps you to make your decisions a lot better. Go back to your goals as a school. And that will help you to make your decisions going this way or that way a lot better. So for us, it was things such as, what platforms are we going to use? Well, we want to make sure that it's bilingual or accessible to our students, because it has to be equitable. These are values that were important to us, to make sure that we could connect with our staff, that we could collaborate together. So any decisions that we make, we want to make sure that we make as a team with teacher input and feedback. So make sure you go back to those core tenets. The next thing is practice the art of simplicity. It's very easy to think that we want to be perfect, and especially for yourself, just be kind to yourself and make things a little bit simpler. You do not have to have the perfect lesson that first day, or even further on. You do not have to try out all the new tools that are out there. You can just start off with one new tool and make sure that your students know how to use that really, really well. And for us, it was just those core platforms. We wanted to make sure our teachers knew how to use those really well. And it's easy to think that you have to do everything now, but you don't. You can wait a little bit and make sure that everyone's on board. Sometimes less is more. The other thing that a lot of teachers lose sight of is how long things will take. And you might have it down pat when you're in the classroom, but when you're online, the internet doesn't always work. And when you have the entire world now on the World Wide Web and using the platforms that only a few people used to use sometimes, things get bogged down. And Microsoft Teams has been bogged down because it was so funny when we were looking at our statistics. Our statistics went up 1,300% on Microsoft Teams when we started to go online. And it was just crazy, the statistics of just how much more we were using the platform. And so, of course, things are going to be slower. Things aren't always going to be working right away. And so you have to take that into account. We have teachers making these amazing 5-minute instructional videos on things such as how to make roti at home. And it took my colleague 2 to 3 hours just to create this 5-minute video. And so remember that's the same case for your students. So something that you think might take your students 20 minutes to do might actually take them 2 hours. So just start off with something very simple. And finally, choose kindness. Make sure you're kind to yourself. You do not have to be perfect. And if you're not, and things don't work out, it's okay. Let it go. It's okay. You can learn from that. And you have not failed. We're all going through this together. You might be doing a lesson with your students and your 3-year-old might come in the door, and that's okay. You can just introduce them to your kids, and your students will probably be super excited to just know that life is normal for you as well, and life can be chaotic, and they will find comfort in knowing that their teacher or principal is feeling the same way. We have done lots of live sessions with our parents, and it's important to give them calmness as well, and to reach out and communicate with them and to let them know that you're listening. There are going to be a lot of people with anxiety, and they might not speak or react the way that they normally do because they are in this high stress mode, and they will continue to be the longer that they are on online learning. And you have to practice grace. You have to learn to breathe. You find people that you can trust, that you can vent with, that will not impact the relationships that you have with other people. And we just need to practice being really kind to each other by giving words of affirmation. One really cool thing in Teams that we have been using, and I'm just gonna pop back to Teams for a second, is the praise mode. And you can see in our faculty training that people started to use the praise mode and emojis as well. But there's a a tool here called Praise, and it is one of the things that we started to use so often because it does nothing other than send praise to people in your school. So oftentimes I would say thank you, or hey, you've been such a team player, and just send praise to people because it will be really, really heartfelt, and people need it. And just something simple as saying you lit up my day today by sharing, or by just working with me, or solving this problem, is really helpful. So make sure that you are kind to each other. So I'm going to move into more nitty gritty now, which is the skill development. And I think it's important to realize that we are all in this growth mindset right now, and learning continues even more so now. None of us are experts at e-learning right now. We are all on this learning journey and trying to figure out new ways to use the tools. We were using Microsoft Teams, and I thought, oh yeah, I've got this down. But the amount of new tools and features that have come to me every day since then has been amazing. Something as simple as just in the corner of Teams, making sure that I have set it to do not disturb when I'm presenting, so that the purple pop-ups do not come up all the time, is something that is really important, because I'm presenting and my screen is being shared. And if these pop-ups keep coming up and somebody says, Sandra, I need help right now, it's not the best thing in the world. And then I had another colleague who shared this set status message, and I was like, oh, that's so great. I didn't realize that was there. And you can actually tell people, I'm having lunch right now, or I'll be back in 5 minutes, and it helps people to know exactly what you're doing. So there's communication happening in these tools, even while we're presenting, or we're doing something else. And these are tools that I learned while I was on the job trying to train other people. So nobody is at their best yet. We're all learning. And the other thing I want you guys to realize is, while you're learning, plan and strategize and work with other people through this. And so I collaborated with two other friends who are in Beijing, in coming up with this infographic, because we were just taking stock of all that we've been learning through this whole process. And they have been 8 weeks into online learning as well. And we're just trying to think about, well, what does that look like? Because people kept asking us, what order of training did you go through? And this is sort of pretty much the order that we went through. But it doesn't mean that as we were teaching the core systems, we didn't go into social and emotional health and wellness. We went to that as well. It's just that as we went deeper into online learning through time, the social, emotional health and wellness became even more important. The assessment and feedback came in more important later on. So this has a little bit of a timeline into it, but at the same time, there's also that importance piece of things, where we felt that social, emotional health and wellness is going to be your most important through this whole period of online learning. And I want to say crisis. I want to say this is a crisis situation, and so that is why that becomes the most important through this whole period of time. But I'm going to break down each of one of these a little bit more for you. For us, when we started early on, it was most important for us that everyone was on the same page in terms of our core communication and learning systems. And we're a Microsoft school, and our email and our Teams was the most important. Most people knew how to use email, but honestly, I did not want our staff to just constantly email me with problems. So making sure that our staff knew how to use Teams was equally important. And luckily enough, we had already started to develop a team structure for our staff. So this is our primary school, but we have one for our secondary school as well, where early on in the year we had already established a communication channel where every one of our grade levels had their own channel to collaborate on. So if I go into the grade 1, and we're a bilingual school, so you'll see that everything comes in English and Chinese, but this was established early on for our teachers, where they could collaborate and share with each other resources through the files and communicate with each other. And we early on taught them how to use the emoji reactions, so that it was an indication that somebody read the message. And you can see that we're still learning. Here's our principal here, head of school, sharing, and it says 3 people have read it. But our principal got really good at posting a daily message for her staff. So here's her last one on World Theater Day. And you can see that she posted up as an announcement. It's very bold. She would share with the staff what was the training that day, some important messages, and then shortly after it would be translated for the staff as well, so that our Chinese speaking staff would know what it was about. And it was great. I taught teachers how to translate, so that if a message was in English, they could translate it into Chinese as well. Now, all of you might not have that need, but this is a really handy tool for us. And we started creating these private channels as well. And these private channels were for the leadership team to be able to come together, plan, and then distill it back to the larger faculty group. And that was super handy, so that everything was in one place right here. So Teams was something that we had to train right away on, making sure that our teachers were upskilled, because this was our core communication platform. The other thing we had to train our staff on was how to do Microsoft Teams meeting with each other, so that they could have a meeting very much like what we're doing now, so that they can plan synchronously. So just making sure that they knew how to go to the calendar and schedule a meeting with their staff, with each other, and eventually to schedule meetings with their students. And then we had to make sure that they also knew how to use Outlook to include group emails, so that students would be able to join in, and they didn't have to type up one student at a time. We taught them and trained them how to do all of those things. You'll notice here I have live events as well. We did a lot of our training using live events for our parents, because we didn't want them to have the same access to chats and sharing their videos as our staff did, because when you're presenting to 200 families, who knows what would pop up in the chat. So having a live event was very, very handy, so that we could present to parents. They could ask their questions using the Q&A function, but we could filter out what was happening without worry or concern that something was being posted that we didn't want to go post it on. So those core systems are really important. We also use Sways to create newsletters or platforms or resources. We created a resource list on Sway, because very much like a website, it just became something that teachers went to all the time, with access to our training videos and our training guides. Actually, one other thing we really used a lot of, and it's not on this slide, I just thought of, was Stream. We developed a new love for Stream, which is a video platform that was super handy, because all of our training videos were then lined up one by one and into this one channel that our staff was on. And I'll just type that in right now so you can see. But pretty much our team created training videos every day that we did with our staff. They were live training, and we just archived them and put them into this next channel. And then we also timestamped them so that it became really easy for teachers to find the videos and to find exactly what they needed. We hashtagged things so that they can search by hashtag. And you can see every single day that we did daily training was archived, and staff could go back to it later on. And this stream also blew up as well. Teachers started to create their own stream channels so that they could post up videos for their students. So you can see grade 10 videos. It was so handy. Primary school student tutorials. All of these were created afterwards with our staff doing it themselves. And you can see we have 60 more videos just through this period of time. So make sure that that is set in the beginning. And then shortly after that, so these are just examples of the daily training. You can see that our staff was sharing with each other what they were doing. So this is one of our Chinese teachers sharing with the staff how she was using PowerPoint to teach her class, and each student being on a different PowerPoint, and how she was able to just give feedback to them. And you can see that our staff was on every day. We had pretty much from 80 to 150 staff members on our daily training every day. And I think it was also because they just wanted to connect with each other. It was at 10 a.m. and they would just grab their coffee and sit and learn and then continue on with their lessons for the rest of the day. And it just became like habit for them. But you'll see that more important than ever is that relationship with the school and the teachers, but also the teachers with the parents. The learners are not by themselves. They're in their home with their parents all the time. And in many cases, especially the younger students, their parents are actually helping them through the math lesson, and they are like the learning assistant. And you need to have a really strong relationship with your parents and your teachers, and make sure that you're all on the same page. You all know how to use the core platforms, and that you're communicating with each other. And you have to keep that relationship in balance all the time. If you're a school leader, you need to make sure you're listening to both, but you need to balance both, because again, we're in crisis situation, and teachers are going to say things that won't make sense, and parents are going to say things that aren't make sense. And you just need to breathe and take stock and think about it before you move forward. After our core systems, that's when we started to move into more digital tools and how to enhance the learning through those digital tools. The things like PowerPoint and Word, how can we use them on an online setting collaboratively? But in addition to that, there's so many free resources out there now that that many of the vendors have started to give for free during this crisis period. And there's so many. How are you going to distinguish which one to use for your school? And I posted this one up because you'll see it says China-friendly apps for online learning. This is applicable to us in our context in China. And in China, not all apps work. And the green ones indicate the ones that do work, and the yellow ones are the ones that kind of work. And there are many apps that I did not put on here because they just don't work in China. And it's going to be the same for you, not necessarily because you have a great China firewall, but maybe because of accessibility, maybe because of the equipment that your students have, maybe because of the age range that you have. Maybe you're teaching to primary students, and a tool doesn't really work for primary. It works more for secondary. And so you are going to have to take stock as a teacher or as a principal or as a tech trainer of what tools make sense for your environment. some will work better for others, but you're going to have to be thoughtful about it, because if you just share every single tool out there to your students or to your teachers, they're going to be overwhelmed and not know what's going on. And coming back to that principle that I shared with you earlier on, practice the art of simplicity. Less is more. And using something really, really well. Maybe it might be Flipgrid. You just want to really master Flipgrid and use that really well with your students. That's okay, because then they're going to be able to dive deeper into something. So be thoughtful about it. Some tools that you're introducing, you want to make sure that it really is enhancing and supporting the learning that's happening. And introduce it slowly. It takes time. You're not in the classroom with your students, so you're not going to be able to see their reaction of how they're doing. You're only going to be able to see if a student is doing their work or not, or replying. And there's a delay oftentimes in their responses. So take stock of that, and take things slowly. Then after you start sharing some digital tools, and this is when they're starting to move from that strive to thrive stage, you want to make sure that you're bringing it back to good teaching practices. And it's going to look different on online learning. You don't want a math lesson that is just 40 minutes of a teacher just talking. But how are you going to make it not just talking? How are you going to make sure that you get feedback from your students? So it's important that you learn how to use the chat feature and get feedback from the students during these different kind of learning activities that you're doing. So these are just some things that I think you can think about during this time. I put TPAC model and SAMR model in the very beginning, just because many of you might be ed tech or technology integrationists, and you're teaching your staff how to use the tools in a positive way or in a way that's effective. And those models will be really helpful. So TPAC meaning you're using technology, pedagogy, and then core knowledge in a symbiotic relationship. So it's not just about technology. It's not just about pedagogy and how you're teaching it. And it's not just about transferring the knowledge to them. You need those all working in balance with each other like a three-legged chair in order for good teaching practices to be happening. And, the SAMR model just being substitution and gosh, my mind is drawing a blank, Michelle, right now. But
it was mine.
But modification and redefinition for sure. But you're going to be going through those different models, and it's okay to just use substitution for your lessons, where you're just, instead of me typing online, you are just going to be using a PowerPoint, and you're just going to type it. Like, instead of writing on a whiteboard, you're just going to type it onto a whiteboard on Teams. That's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just use the tools available to you, but then think about when you're using technology in a really, really meaningful way. So those are things that you want to think about. And then the other really important thing that as a school you're going to have to start thinking about, or as a teacher, is asynchronous and synchronous. Honestly, I'm going to tell you, it's impossible to have a completely synchronous learning environment, and it will probably not be wise to have a completely asynchronous teaching model either. And I'm going to explain why. So synchronous means you're going face-to-face live all the time. I can't imagine a teacher just 5 hours a day being live with their students and teaching live. It's just going to be impossible. And the timing for us, our teachers were in different time zones even. So it was not realistic for our teachers to be up at 3 a.m. teaching to our students here who were at 10 a.m. It just didn't make sense. So we had to balance between posting activities up and then making sure that for us, we decided 50% of our lessons would be online, and that's kind of where we moved into, but we started off with just one lesson a week being synchronous. But you can't be asynchronous completely either, because your students are going to miss you. They're going to miss each other. It got to a point where we were 3 weeks in, and our head of school shared this video with the staff so that they would understand how important synchronous learning was. And it was a student who was sharing with the teacher. She had just done a video to the teacher and sharing how she's doing. And she said, "I miss you a lot. I miss the school a lot. I miss my classmates a lot. And I wish I was there with you. I even miss fighting with my friends because I am so lonely at home." And we were listening to this video as a staff during the training. We're like, oh my gosh, this poor kid. And this is why synchronous learning is so important. It's for that connection piece. Your students just want to see each other. They just want to see you. Your parents just want to see the principal or the teachers and know that they're not just this talking email. They need to see the reactions of you. So the synchronous learning is really important. And Tanya Leclerc did this really great infographic here. She's from Korea, and I've put it up here as well. But it's important for you to make that balance between the two. And then the other good teaching practices that were important when you were live is just as important online. Visible thinking routines can happen online. Project-based learning can happen online. It's even better because now you're not having a daily lesson. You give a student an activity and they take time to mull over it, to think about it, to work on it, to use materials from home, and it's more authentic. They can try to think about projects that relate to what's going on in their lives right now. Our teachers started doing a lot of COVID-19 activities. For example, just having our students research and investigate professions that have been affected by COVID-19. And that's so meaningful as they do these researches. And there's online and offline activities, because you don't want everything to be online and having a student sitting on their computer all day long. And we don't want to just distill information to them. We want them to create and to share with each other. So all of these that were good practices before are just as important online. And I got to move and hustle. But that goes for assessment and feedback strategies as well, because you don't want to just give online tests over and over and over again. There's a plethora of different tools that you can use to get feedback and assessment information. So use them. Have students do oral projects using Flipgrid, and then you giving feedback and peer feedback. Make sure that you can get diagnostics using forms, and you're using the chat features frequently. And assessment does not have to be limited to a test. You can have them to do podcasts or interviews with their parents and post them up. They can do a read aloud, and they're just reading it to maybe their little baby brother, and then they're posting it up. Maybe they're creating books, or we actually, as a school, continued on with our big Model UN project using Teams, actually. And we had all of our different topics in the Model UN in a different Teams group. And then we use the channels to be able to have students collaborate in their different groups. So we use the Teams Live. We had a three-hour Model UN, and the students dressed up in their outfits and represented the different countries, talking about the different issues about women equality, about healthcare, and we continued on with it. And that was so rich. We got to see how much the students learned just by doing a different kind of format. And it didn't have to be an exam where we had to worry about academic integrity and making sure that the kids were not going onto a different browser or using their phone to look things up. If you can avoid exams, I would avoid exams, because you don't want to monitor that. It's just really complex and it's very, very challenging. So that's assessment. And finally, social emotional health and wellness. I know I have one more minute. We frequently, as a leadership team, made sure we did staff meetings. So this is our staff meeting right here. You can see our head of school and our associate head of school and all the leadership just kind of using Teams Live to connect with our staff. But making sure you care for each other. Write an email to your colleague, write an email to your students, call them up, set up Teams meetings with counselors. We had counselors on staff, so we made sure that our students knew that they can access our counselors the whole time. And finding balance, making sure that as teachers and leaders and as students, they're balancing between working and playing. We actually, in being in China for the first time, we had parents telling us, no homework, please. And we had to tell the teachers to stop sending home homework. Their day is so stressful online that they do not need extra work on top of that. We had to start telling teachers to do 40 to 60% of their academic work because it was just too much on the students. And it's amazing. I am a workaholic, and a lot of my friends know this, and you'll find me oftentimes working on weekends. But during this online learning period, I had to take breaks on the weekend. And my phone told me that my usage rate went down a lot and during the weekends because I just needed that break. I was so tired. I was zonked. And my teachers have been saying the same thing, and you need that break. So exercise, stretch, watch your posture. I have my kids coming in every now and then giving me massages. A friend of mine told me about this neck exercise that really helps. Her physio told her about it, and it works even better than the arm stretches. So I highly recommend that. I had another colleague give me eye patches that warm up your eyes at night, and she says she uses them every night just to help rest her eyes. But keep yourself healthy. Remember that work is always going to be there, and you can let it just sit there another day. It will not be the end of the world if you do. And same thing for your students. Give them a little bit of grace. If they don't hand it in on time, that's okay. Just check in on them, make sure they're okay, and allow them to hand it in a little bit later. It's not going to be the end of the world. And so finally, just to let you know, you are not alone. I have not seen more generosity and collaboration than I have in these past 8 weeks. We have, as I shared, as schools, collaborated with each other and shared openly our training videos and our documents. I did a demo slam, which Michelle helped me with, but I had colleagues from other schools joining in on these demo slams, helping me out and presenting. You are not alone, and you can find help very easily. And I know we have the 3 R's for the environment, but I have the 3 C's for this online learning period, which is connect, collaborate, and contribute. Connect with other people. Make sure you aren't reinventing the wheel, because there's so many things out there. You do not have to create another training video, because there are so many amazing training videos out there. Just give attribution, bookmark them, create a YouTube channel for your staff, or a streams channel for your staff, and post up the important links that they need to know. Collaborate and work with with each other. Don't be an island. If there's another third grade teacher in your school, then take turns. One teacher plans one lesson one day, the other one plans the other lesson the next day. You can actually work together and do less. Crowdsource. If you have a question, post it out there into the Twitterverse. Ask, and you'd be amazed at how many people are going to respond. And celebrate with each other the great work that you're doing. You need to do that. You need to share and make sure you're giving high fives or high elbows to each other of all the great things that you're doing, and share your ideas as well. Something that Derek Sivers says is maybe simple to you, but is amazing to others. You would be amazed at how much just a simple tip or trick will change the life of your colleague. And you're like, oh, I thought everyone knew that. I feel so embarrassed to share this, but you'll be helping a colleague. So share your experiences, blog, post, podcast. We all need to support each other during this time. And speaking of which, these are just a few places for you to look, especially for Microsoft resource. I highly recommend Mike Tholson. There's a lot of things that he's been posting up, and Matt Miller and Holly Clark have been posting up a lot of great things. Sorry, my kids are in the background. They just woke up. But they've been posting a lot of really great Microsoft resources as well. And then Jennifer Wathel here was the one that I shared in the very beginning of the session with the infographic. She continues to be posting up really cool infographics, and I highly recommend that as well. And Tanya Leclerc was the infographic with asynchronous and synchronous, and she's been doing some great stuff in Korea. And lastly, Kim Cofino, who is an international educator, but she does podcasts, and she does a regular podcast with other international educators who are, again, a little bit further along in the future than you, and a lot of really good words of wisdom that I highly recommend for all of you. And there's a lot of resources. So check out, there's a Teams that you can join, a Teams community you can join called Microsoft Enable Remote Learning Community. Join that. That's a great forum to get new resources. There's the Microsoft Education Center, which is awesome. You can get certified as a Microsoft educator in the meantime while doing those, but there's things that are not even online learning resources that are on there. Things like one I did that was on, people who have dyslexia. And it was a great course that I went through that was developed by Microsoft. And there's stuff on assistive technology, just really good courses that I highly recommend. And Sethi does these amazing tutorials, and he has an amazing one on Teams that I highly recommend, and doing Teams meetings. So that's some resources for you to think about. And that's it. Sorry, I went over time, Michelle. But if you have questions, I'd still be glad to stay on and answer them if you have them.
Fabulous, Sandra, like just so much information, so many great strategies, such great wisdom. And I can't tell you how much that neck stretch, like I had no idea how much my shoulders would hurt. That neck stretch has like just changed my world. So I'm not sure if we've got some questions in the chat. I know you answered so many things. I love that you mentioned the dyslexia resources. That was a question that we had a little bit earlier. So that's, I mean, just a great place to send people. So we'll maybe just take a second and see if there's any questions. I think one thing for me, you talked a lot about podcasts and recording themselves. What would you say is that one sort of accessible, easy tool that our students can use to create those sorts of recordings?
Well, I mean, definitely Teams is a great resource because all they need to do is just video record, and they have their own webcast already. But if you just want something voice related, I love Soundtrap. That's really great. There's a lot of Anchor is another one that I use for my podcast. It is really easy.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know I've used Soundtrap, and I think they're free with COVID, I think. But do you use a paid version or a free version of that one?
I use a premium version of it.
You do. Yeah. No, I mean it's fabulous, fabulous program for sure. Well, I think, Sandra, we've got a lot of thank yous coming through in the chat for sure. You just had so many great resources. We just thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we are so glad that we'll still be in touch with you and still be able to learn alongside you. So with that, I just, again, to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
And you have a great morning, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.